I just had an in-depth conversation with Fred, the author of Dying for Benefits. And let's just say when I first got introduced to Fred and started reading his book, this book is very much written in a way attacking life insurance. So literally the subtitle is, "Warning, life insurance can be fatal to your financial health." And Fred comes from the perspective of litigation, and he's seen bad example after bad example after bad example, especially in the IUL space. And so he saw this and he's just like, there's people getting ripped off left and right. And so he wrote this book. I think he reached out because he liked what we were up to. He felt like we had a platform that he could have a conversation around. Originally, when getting his email and looking at his book, I was like, man, I don't know if there's any common ground that we're going to find. But then in conversations, I realized it was the exact opposite. Fred was someone who wanted to learn more and he wanted the right thing. And the reason why he wrote this book was to protect people first and foremost. And so I shared with him how we use life insurance for entrepreneurial investors and how someone would use life insurance as a better bond, and just to get his real perspective. And he constantly went back to about the loans and all. And I think there's a couple of things that we were on different pages. And the first thing was, Fred, welcome to the BetterWealth show.
Thank you.
This one is going to be a must-watch for many of our audience. You reached out to me. You wrote the book Dying for Benefits. It says, "Warning, life insurance can be fatal for your financial health." And the subtitle of this is, "Warning, when sold as a tax-deferred investment, life insurance is hazardous to your long-term financial health and retirement nest egg. Only invest if you're prepared to lose some or all of your retirement savings and insurance." I received this book. I actually purchased this book because I want to support authors, and read this whole thing and have many questions. And I also think we're going to have a very great conversation. We've had a couple times that we've talked previously, and every time we've had a lovely conversation. And I think that we will be able to talk about some legitimate problems in our space. I'll be able to maybe challenge you on some of the claims that you made. You'll be able to challenge me on some of the claims that I've made in the past. And you don't have any horse in the race as it relates. You're retired. You're looking at this from a litigation standpoint because you've been brought in. I'll let you share your story. But you come down very, very hard on life insurance. And I am grateful that you're willing to come on the show. I don't think you do a ton of podcasts at this point. And so the fact that you're coming on to a life insurance podcast, I'm grateful. And so I think we'll have a great discussion. Before we jump in, though, why don't you give just a little bit of your backstory and why you're even interested in doing a podcast like this?
Well, I have a long backstory. I've been involved in the investment business, litigation business, as an expert witness, as a forensic and analyst for 30 years. And my job has been to analyze accounts, take a look at the projections, see the representations or misrepresentations, and see if there is some reason why a court or a jury can say the client was misled. I mean, that's the essence of what we do. And I have a perspective, and in every bit of litigation, there's an expert on the other side saying, well, that's not exactly the right way. But that's my background. And so when I take a look at these policies, my interest is, how do they work? I understand, and I think your podcasts do a terrific job in comparing policies and talking about which ones to prefer for which type of assets and how to compare that. And I don't have any problems with insurance per se.
Okay.
That's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to talk about not whether insurance is good or bad. I have insurance. A lot of people have insurance. The ability to borrow from the cash value exists for everybody. And that is not essentially the overall concerns that I have with regards to why I wrote the book. Now, I wrote the book principally because I was involved in index universal life litigation, which is far different because of the way the illustrations are presented. And so at the time I wrote this book, my view, the perspective that I took was that policies are like IULs, maybe a little less and a little lot. And at the end of the period when I was going over this book and putting it together, and understand I'm starting from zero, right?
Yeah.
So in a couple, in 12 months, I had to kind of pick up on all of this kind of stuff, teach myself. I'm not an insurance guy. And at the end of that particular period, I wrote this book. But what occurred was, towards the end of writing this book, I was tasked with clients of attorneys who had invested in dozens of whole life policies under the promoted infinite banking concept. And all of these clients had multiple policies. All of them had to be surrendered. All of them had to have had huge amounts of losses, both in actual money and in tax consequences. And so I wrote a little bit about it. It just seemed to be the tail end of things. I didn't know how big it was at the time. And I just thought, well, maybe I'll mention it. Since that period of time, I've learned a whole bunch more, including watching your shows and reading these policies. And overall, I'm at the investment banking concept approach right now, which you and I have been discussing, has not an insurance problem, as I see. It's not a problem with the policy. It's a problem with the withdrawals. And it's a problem of how that money is used and taken out. And when I did an evaluation on these cases relative to what was expected, I found that at the end of 20 or 25 or 30 years, the interest burden, the carry burden, and the cost burden really jeopardized the client. And what you have, of course, is a huge tax consequence if you surrender the policy. In some cases, in 30 years, the taxes on a policy with $50,000 and, let's say $800,000 in overall premiums could have a gain, if they surrender the policy, of over $2 million and a tax on top of that. So these were real problems that I began to see, and it seemed to me that the policies, unless they're structured very intimately and monitored regularly, day in, I don't mean day in, but year in or month out, to see how the loans are performing, these policies eventually come to the point, at least under my scenarios, what I'm looking at, where they're really unsustainable after 30 or 35 years. And that means there's a huge tax consequence. And that was based upon the way I formulated the withdrawal scheme. That's it. And so the thing I'm looking for most of these policies to put me in some comfort level is, how do you take the money out? Not just theoretically, but with the policy and under the policy constraints. That is that you're limited in your loans to what the policy is able to produce. And so that effectively limits how much you can take and what it's going to be doing. And within those constraints, can these policies survive? And so I've reached the point in terms of my analysis. And what I've done is I put the policy together with the debt together, with the tax consequences together, and I've sent you that. And these are exhibits that I thought would be really good starting points to have a discussion with someone. Yep. And what's his name? Your associate, Adam Alden.
Yes.
And it seems that Alden, I would love to spend a little time with Alden talking about just this very issue, because it's a solution. If I'm involved and you can tell, if I'm involved in 12 policies for a middle class, upper middle class retiree, what the outcome is likely to be if we're talking about misrepresentations and stuff.
Yeah, if you're seeing probably the worst of the worst, I imagine, if they're getting you involved. And so, so just to recap what you're saying is your main issue is the long-term stability of how you get money out of these contracts, how they don't blow up. You mentioned a taxable, could be a tax bomb coming on somebody, because let's say you contributed, just to make math easy, you contributed $1 million over your lifetime, and the growth was $2 million. So cash values of $3 million. And let's say that you surrender that, or it lapse, and it could lapse because you take all the money out via loans, and then you're not sustaining it, or at least paying the interest, and then boom, the policy eats itself. Well, now you have, in that scenario, you have a $2 million ordinary income tax in that year.
Right. And when we take a look at the cash value of a policy, right, and say, oh, well, it's $3 million, right? I mean, because we can see how the policy grows. If it's $2 million or whatever it is, there's never, if in fact you're talking about surrender value, I don't think you're complete unless you talk about, or unless you illustrate what I call a phantom tax issue, which is, if in fact you had to surrender your policy at this stage, you may get all this money, but you have a tax liability down at the end because of what's generally known as phantom income. And if you're paying the debt itself, you're going to have, well, anyway, it's phantom income, and that is daunting. You don't want to be 70 years old or 75 years old, right, with a $2.5 million tax bill. I mean, it'll just ruin your life, right, even though you have some of the money and stuff like that.
Now,
so that's what
I want to go through some. I want to address all this stuff. I do want to go through some things that you wrote in your book to
sure,
talk about, maybe address. But you say on the first page 8 on the preface, you say the insurance industry has conducted and marketed a variety of policy types, especially targeting investors and retirees. These policies promise safety, guaranteed wealth accumulation, lifetime tax-free income, and low-interest loans without market risk, all regulated under a patchwork of inefficient state regulations. Unfortunately, nearly all claimed tax advantages and accumulation benefits are misleading, resulting in trillions of dollars in personal wealth being transferred to life insurance companies over the years in exchange for an overpriced death benefit. It sounds like you
sounds like an IUL.
Yeah, but I mean, it very much. I mean, when I read that, I was like, oh boy, we're in for a treat in this book, because you're not shy about your distaste around this industry, and you've talked about buying term and investing the difference. What is it? Is your professional experience that people should just buy term and not deal with any permanent life insurance, or do you think there is a world where permanent life insurance can play a role? You're not going to hurt my feelings, regardless of how you answer this. I'm just curious your take right now, where you're sitting.
Permanent insurance, whole life insurance, can have a meaningful place in a person's financial setup. I have no objection to people buying whole life insurance, especially when they need life insurance in whatever the amount is,
right,
that they want for the protection. And if they want to make it permanent, or if they have an estate that they want to have, and that's the best way to do it, there's just generally no objection. I don't have any objection to that. That's a legitimate, it's been going on for a century or more.
Right.
And
banks do it.
And I'm not here to stand in the way of borrowing from life insurance or telling you that I wouldn't buy life insurance. I think my overall concern is the overinsurance part, is that if I've got $2 or $3 million of insurance, why do I need 40 million? Why do we need to pay for 35 or 30 or $20 million worth of insurance? And the only reason to buy that amount of insurance is for investment purposes for the most part. That's why it's set up. And what I found is IBC people don't particularly focus on the death benefit as much as they do the cash flow. How much money can they get out? How can they live? How can they retire? What are their tax consequences?
Yeah.
So
I think you and I would both agree on this, that life insurance should not be used as an investment. And I personally don't think you should lean on life insurance as a sole bucket for income. I'll share later. I do think it can enhance other aspects. And so I do think there's a play to overfund life insurance, but not for maybe the same reasons that you might think. And I will go on record for saying life insurance should not be the primary or only asset, especially for the middle class, when it comes to the retirement supplement. And I think this is where it has been abused over and over again on infinite banking and retirement supplements. I think there's even like a life insurance retirement plan, LIRP, and like people are selling these LIRP plans, and you see this attractive income. There's people on YouTube, Fred, that are that are selling these things, telling people to cash out other assets, don't put money in other investments, put all their money into especially index universal life products, and then leverage inside the index universal life product to get more exposure, to have more income. And I look at this and I go, this is going to be a freaking disaster, and it breaks my heart to see. And so I just want to be very clear as we get into some of these things that I do not think, for the record, that life insurance should be sold that way. And if someone is just literally selling life insurance to strip out money in some creative way to get tax-free income, which it's not considered income, as you wrote in your book. It's a loan. Loans are not income, hence why they're quote unquote tax advantage. That's very problematic, especially since I don't believe that the insurance policy is going to internally grow greater long term than the external cost. And so, then you might ask, why in the world would you do life insurance under that assumption? We'll talk about that later, because I believe my goal is to get you to at least understand where I'm coming from. But I just want to be very clear that infinite banking, and especially index universal life as alert plan, they've been used and abused, and it's only going to get worse. And I think we're only seeing the beginning of lawsuits.
Well, you can understand if that's now what you described in terms of the abuse, the things that you wouldn't recommend are precisely the clients, exactly what happened to the clients that we're representing, and it was on the IBC standard, and it is it's not like IULs in the same sense, but the point is that when we see these clients with these 10, 12, 14 policies, trying to service them, borrowing out money, borrowing from one to pay for premiums and another, that's the abuse that I entered this space with. And when you take a look at all insurance policies, whether whoever buys it, it doesn't matter. The same insurance policy, there may be 10,000 sold in the same day at the same time. They all have the same outcomes. Right. The only thing that's different is the withdrawal pattern. And when I see one policy that's bad, that has problems, I can presume that every policy that was sold at the same time, like it with the same conditions,
right,
really is going to perform the same way. And so that's my view of how these things work. And this is, I guess, part of the reason why I was so affirmative in terms of my statements. I will say this: when I revise this book, I'll let you edit it.
Okay, please.
Really?
Please. I might even write an endorsement for this. So I want to give context, because now I'm going to kind of address some things I disagree with in the book. But I wanted to give context to the perspective that you're coming and share with you where I agree, because the big picture we agree. You say, I didn't count, but you say a lot. It's a lot. It's a key theme in this book that 85 to 90% of permanent policies, or what you call accumulation policies, are going to lapse. And I don't know how, where you're coming up with that number. And I just want to give you a chance to maybe to respond to that, because I think that that's not accurate. And I'm just curious, but that was a common theme that you use kind of as a cherry on top in a lot of your examples. You're on top of this, majority, 85% of accumulation policies will lapse. So, and I would agree with you, if under that assumption, I would just be Dave Ramsey and say, unless you're ultra wealthy and you know what you're doing, buy term and invest the difference. And for the record, I think most people should do that. They would avoid a lot of pitfalls. But I just wanted to hear, I think I come from the whole life space with good companies. And so I think these numbers, that's a red flag. I understand how IULs could be higher. I also think term policies could potentially be included in this, and anytime they expire or something could be drawn in this number. So I wanted you to be able to respond to that.
Well, my statistics, as I mentioned, were based on IULs, and LIMRA, which is the life insurance warehouse of statistics, publishes a lapsing and surrender statistic, which shows that between 5 and 7% of IULs surrender annually, more towards the end. And when you add that all up, that means that after 20 or 25 years, there are very few policies left, especially if you add into the deaths, the normal mortality rate. So the statistic that I was talking to is based on LIMRA's assessment of surrenders or lapses in the IUL space. That's what it is.
Okay.
And I am convinced that I'm probably very close.
Okay.
On the mutual whole life policy, if I were to make an assessment, my feeling is that the death benefits are paid on between 20 and 25%, probably 10% more. It could be as high as 30%, but it can't be any higher than 30%. I mean, basically, if we know just mathematically that insurance companies can't pay the death benefit on 100% of their policies, they'd be out of business. Or the policy premiums would be astronomical. It'd be unaffordable. So the real question to me, isn't what I'm saying in terms of is it 15% or in whole life it could be under 30%. The real question that I have is, what's the answer? Do you know? And so I'm saying is that it's not up to me in this particular issue. It's up to the insurance agents, people in your situation, to know what that statistic is. Mm-hmm. I can guess at it, but but if you speak to the actuaries and if you speak to the underwriters, probably you'd find that whole life is underwritten to pay benefits on, say, 20 to 25% of the policies. Mm-hmm. Which means that 70 to 75% of the policies will either lapse or surrender. And I know that's kind of going from the death benefit side to the surrender side. But the point is, we all know that policies surrender, and we just don't know exactly how many. But if you thought it was 70%, then 7 out of 10 clients aren't going to make it through unless they die with the policy in effect.
I think what's tricky about this, and you're totally right, there should be more transparency, is you even look at the IUL space, and just for the record, I'm not a fan or advocating for IUL. Like I'm just for the record, like we are pretty much only whole life for probably a lot of the points that you're making. But if I had to defend them for a second, which kind of makes me sick inside, the industry has grown significantly. The amount of premium dollars, the amount of policies, and so part of that could be that, when you look at statistics, I want to know how many are new policies, how many are old policies, and then also factoring in, they're getting new policies filtering in. So part of the numbers could be, yes, that would be true if 5 to 7%, every single year, but it's sometimes hard to factor in the new premium and policies that are getting added to that. And then I know in whole life, when I was looking at statistics, and you're right, it's very frustrating when I'm looking at researching. It's really hard to tell. But what I saw in whole life is this after 10 years, the industry lapse ratio is very low. Why? Because in most cases, even in whole life that's maybe not structured that great, you have maybe all of what you've put in. So there's maybe a less reason to put, quote unquote, cancel. But in life insurance, especially early on, the first year, 2 or 3, if you don't structure it overfunded, you have almost no cash value. And I would imagine that the lapse ratios early on are high, which is it's a problem. But I'm just wondering. I think the answer is we don't know. But it would just
My question is, why not? Don't you think it would be important to know?
I think it would be really important to know, and I think every insurance company should have to publish that. We on the whole life side. Just so you know, we did a whole life insurance study where we're showing how much loans they have outstanding, and I think it is important to see their lapse ratios. I think every insurance company should have to report that so that we have total transparency and we would know the exact numbers. We would know per insurance companies how much policies they have on the books versus lapse ratios, and then per year. I think would be really fascinating.
Well, in later years, I think the lapse ratio in whole life is somewhere around 2% a year, 2 to 2.5% a year. It could be a little higher. And there's of course, there's a phenomenon, especially with investment banking, where you have the high debt that um, that the individuals who are taking that during retirement, that one of the earliest things that retirees let go of is their life insurance. They don't need to protect anybody. They lapse it. They want to collect the benefit. And the problem with infinite banking is if they ever wanted to do that, they can't, because of the tax implications on the total gains if they ever lapse their policy. And it's kind of like handcuffs. It's a bad situation. At age 70, I don't want to be in an insurance policy where I can take out a limited amount of money, but if anything goes wrong, I have $1 million or $2 million or $3 million tax bill I got to pay. And so,
what's
and
the
so
difference
these
between a
things either
qualified
lapse.
plan? What's the difference between a qualified plan? You have your money. If you want to cash the whole thing out in an IRA, you're going to have to pay ordinary income tax. And if you're under 59 and a half, you'd have to pay a 10% penalty on top of that.
Well, no, I agree. I mean, there's the tax, these are tax-driven investments, essentially.
Right.
And the only thing we don't know about in any of these illustrations is what's the tax. So if you're getting tax benefits and it's tax-free and you're talking about surrender value, you shouldn't be talking about surrender value without the tax consequences that you can calculate.
Yes. I think and I'll just use myself as an example, we're not factoring in canceling the policy, but then it could be misleading if you're looking at the total cash value but you're not factoring in the tax, because technically you should factor in maybe 95% of the cash value, because you only have access to 95%. If you have access to more, by surrendering the policy, there's gonna be a tax on the gain. I think the other thing is, and I just want to be clear, no tax is a bad thing, but we are talking about the gain, meaning, like anything, it's like this: you're not paying tax on the money that you've put in; it's only on the difference. And so this is technically money that has grown. And some proponents in whole life will say, or IUL will say, that you'll never have growth. So I guess if you never have growth, you'll never have to worry about taxes, but it was a money pit for you to put your money in to begin with.
No, I agree. Yeah. So towards the end, you calculate what you put in and what the cash value would be, and that would be the gain.
Right.
And that's a kind of a tax surprise. So if you're, part of the issue is people are thinking they're getting tax-free income, which really isn't.
Yeah, they should stop calling
it. And so if they get
income
out or they start paying it down, they're really, it's additional cash flow out of their pocket.
All right. So I want to, page 12, you say that you have to pay premiums for life. You just make that point that you have to die to get the benefit, and you mentioned that it takes 5 to 15 years to recoup some or all of what you paid in. And so, number one, are you writing this through the lens of typical IULs that you saw?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Because,
and as it turns out, you don't really
actually do what's called a reduced paid up, but in an IUL, you technically do have to make sure that the policy or you pay the premiums for the rest of your life. And if they're not structured properly, it could blow up. I just wanted to clarify, because in whole life, you can technically reduce pay up and not have to pay premiums if you don't want to.
That's right, but then you lose the withdrawal benefit and you just maintain the death benefit principally.
When you say lose a withdrawal benefit, what do you mean with a reduced paid up?
Well, if you're not adding, and if you're putting in less money because you really only want to support the base of the policy for the plus the paid up, you're putting less money in, and you have an ongoing interest cost. And so what I'm saying is that the impact of the reductions, or just the pay, now you can pay it out of your own premiums, will ultimately decrease some of the benefits depending on how long you live. And so I don't see that as much of an issue. I will say this: in all of the cases that I'm retained in, all of the policies were 100% base.
Okay. That's a fair point to make. I would say, this is my understanding in whole life, is if someone pays in for 10 plus years and they want to stop paying premiums, they can do what's called a reduce paid up, where the death benefit will drop significantly. And whatever their cash value is, what will look like is the cash value and the death benefit will slowly grow. Now, I'm not talking about taking loans at this point, but it will be fully sustainable without outside of money. The difference in IUL is you can stop paying premiums, but because of the annual renewable term chassis, it doesn't necessarily work that way. So there have been cases, and there could be cases where there's more fuzziness there. And in your case, you're looking at policies that are fully base or high targets, maybe less flexible. And in an IULs, you can't technically reduce paid up. That's where it's like I felt like in your book, maybe for version 2, it's like talking about the differences between universal life chassis and whole life, because coming from my space, I'm like, this is a great point, but I feel like all the life insurance gets
I agree.
Put into a bucket,
No, I mean, to me, there's no financial benefit to me here. I'm not selling anything. I don't have anything.
Yeah.
I would like to be right.
Yeah.
Not wrong. I have no ego involvement in that. And so in terms of rewriting the book and making the corrections, clearly I need to clarify that issue in second version.
Okay.
Certainly you can get the help. I'm not arguing that particular
on
point.
page 13, you say, if your policy is surrendered or lapses, which is likely, all the loans you've taken over the years will be taxed as ordinary income unless they are repaid. Additionally, you face extra tax if you are under 59.5, depending on your policy's non-MEC status.
Right.
The way that I see that is it has nothing to do with the loans. It just has to do with whatever is gained above basis. I don't think the loans
That is correct. Okay. That's absolutely correct. Well, it looks like loans is basically whatever you get out first, comparable to the total amount of premiums, is a return of principal, and it's not taxed, but the rest of the income would be. That's correct. And so that needs to be clarified as well.
Okay. Next point is on page 16. I actually saw this before we talked for the first time, and I was like, I thought you were going to be a very different character when I saw you, because I'm like, oh boy, because when I see this, I was like, oh boy, I was like ready for a debate. And it was the illustration that you gave, and you're showing a 30-year level term, and you're showing a whole life accumulation, non-MEC status. Now, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt, and there's probably policies like this that you ran, but this policy that you're putting $15,200 in never breaks even, meaning you never have more cash value accumulation than what you've put in. In fact, in year 40, maybe in year 35. So you see in year 35, you've contributed $532,000 and your accumulated cash value is 620. I don't know if you can reference that.
So I know where you're going on here. I don't think you need to beat me up more about this particular issue. But yes, the illustration is based on a policy that probably would never be sold.
Or if it is, I would have major problems with it, especially in the accumulation state.
And part of that has to do with the timing of my entry into the litigation space. I certainly have a lot better way to clarify those particular informations. And you and I, in fact, over the past week or 10 days, I've certainly provided you with illustrations that accept the growth and those particular conditions. So I would say you and I are on the same page on that. You and the book and me are not on the same page.
Okay, awesome. I'm just going through because I'm going to then propose to you. I'm going to be put on trial, and I want you to poke holes at my proposal to you around how I position life insurance. And I want you to be brutally honest, because we agree on the not taking income. And I think it would be really fun if I could convince you that our idea is at least Fred verified. That's my goal. I might not get this stamp today, but I'll ship you a stamp if you can verify our message. In page 23, you said whole life policies will never break even. I think that you're, for the record, just saying that's not true.
There are multiple structures make that possible. Whether it
Yep.
breaks even in the fifth year, whether that's an important factor. One of the interesting things about the break-even point is, and you've provided me with two policies. One breaks even in about the fifth year. I think that was the Lafayette, and the Penn breaks even around 9 or 10 years or whatever that is. But at the end result, the Penn's growth is about, in 30 years, is about 300% versus the Lafayette's, which is about 225%. So whether you get the money up front or not really doesn't seem to have, unless you absolutely need the money, depending on how you position yourself. For the most part, it's really all about the end. But I can certainly see how some policies will project much higher cash flows. And then the question is, the one that I have focused on in the last 10 days is, how do you get the money out? What are you taking out? Under what conditions? What are you going to pay? Are you going to pay the interest? You're going to accumulate? You're going to pay are you going to pay the loan principal back? How does that all work? And if it's going to work, I want to know what the source of that income is to make all of those repayments.
Yep. We'll get to that. And I just want to be, just for the record, you did say the guaranteed, not the non-guaranteed. So you've never put on in writing non-guaranteed, never breaking even, but that, for the record, has been corrected. And then on page 30 in your book, you said you either surrender your policy or take a loan. And that's like pretty much alluding to that's the only ways to access your money. And what I wrote down is like, well, you could withdraw a basis, but I guess that is a form of surrender. Is that what you meant? Is like, if you withdraw money from cash value, you technically can withdraw it first in, first out. Technically, I do think that's considered a partial surrender. So I just wanted to get clarity on what you meant by that. But you can withdraw money and not have to totally surrender the policy or have to take a loan if you didn't want to do that.
Right. Well, I mean, the issue is you can withdraw. The only way to get your money out of the policy is to some form of surrender. Mm-hmm. That is, if you want your money back, you can take money out from your policy, and it will reduce the benefits, the tax benefits and the death benefits. The alternative to taking your money out, which is really the only way you can actually get the cash, is to borrow from the insurance company, and that's a different ball game. And part of when I read Nelson Nash's book, it seemed to be focused on, we don't want to deal with these big institutions, these big banks that keep your money. And in point of fact, what's happening is you're giving all of your money to one of the biggest financial institutions, and they're conducting loans, and you're borrowing from them, not from yourself. And so just kind of straightening that out in my own mind, and who you're borrowing from. And when you take a look at these illustrations on surrender, who you're paying the interest to.
Yeah.
And it's always the insurance company, because it's always deducted, or you always have to pay it back.
I agree. And I think, I've said this multiple times, if someone's whole pitch is do business with this thing to stick it to the big banks or Wall Street, you wonder, I mean, again, that's their principles. Great. I have a problem of people that say that, but then don't show you the actual numbers and how it works. And so I think we're in agreement there. All right. So the next thing is you have in your book infinite, like a whole section dedicated on infinite banking scams, and I think it's definitely worth the read. And I think we could actually write more in the second edition and talk about certain things that could be misleading, because I think you mentioned even Mass Mutual, how you commend them for creating a memo. Just to be very clear, there are people out there that sell life insurance and then go around and tell you that you can literally use this like a bank account, and you're buying your groceries and you're buying your gas. And when I look at that, I think that needs to be not only called out on all platforms, including mine, including the Institute, Infinite Banking Institute, which, to be clear, they also don't endorse that. But there are people that will use certain things for their own gain, because at the end of the day, if they can sell more life insurance, they get paid more in that year. And so you kind of follow the money. If you look at the quote by, was it Charlie Munger? He said, "Show me an incentive, I'll show you an outcome." And it's like that. There's truth to that. So I just want to point out that I agree with what you've said. Anything you want to mention before my next point?
Well, I write from experience and try to learn the product on the way. I see clients, and what you've simply described, the things that are problematic that you don't endorse, which is policies which are funded out of qualified plans where you take them out under 72T, where income is being deposited directly into the life insurance, buys more premium and then borrowing. And then what occurs is with that overall strategy, which people buy into, is that all of their assets wind up in insurance cash value. And when it comes to liquidity, the only liquidity they have is borrowing from the insurance company, as opposed to taking their own money from IRAs or all the other kinds of things that places that it could be. And so we see a focus not only over insurance, but a focus on concentrating all of these expendable assets into whole life policies as a method of producing what's promised to be tax-free income for life. And that's what I've seen. And so, it's hard, especially since all policies perform pretty much the same way. It's only the borrowing that's the difficulty. And so what I see is, what I've seen disaster, and my conclusions, without dealing with people in your side before, because I wrote the book well before you and I were speaking, has left me with that impression. And that's what I was writing about. So.
Yep. You mentioned in the same chapter of Infinite Banking about front-loaded commissions. And you mentioned they can be anywhere ranging from 85% to 135% of the premium in the first year. I want to be very clear that you're referencing 100% base.
Exactly.
And obviously, if someone's pushing infinite banking and then writing 100% base contract, I have no words to describe that.
That's what I've seen.
Okay, yeah, that would be I would be pulling my hair out if I saw that, and
that's on 12 policies.
Yeah,
and that's the strategy. Now, I will say that this particular agent was the top agent for this particular company and was sent around the country to train other agents.
Yeah, that's a shame.
Just let me mention one thing. These conversations are more important to me than almost anything in terms of understanding what these things are. And I have made a really conscious decision. It's not anything that I want to do to respond or to put comments under your videos. I don't want to have debates with anybody else like that. What's most important for me is getting to the source of the information and having cogent discussions. So I'm not interested in battling other people's ideas or stuff like that. I just think that we can focus on what's actually happening in this space.
So now I want to put myself on trial. Okay. And this could be the worst thing I ever decide to do. But I wanna go through two examples, an infinite banking type example, and then a retirement example. Share with you how I believe permanent life insurance should be positioned, if it should be positioned at all, and then get your real-time thoughts. You game for that?
Sure.
Okay. So I sent you two illustrations. A Penn Mutual illustration and a Lafayette Life illustration. And one of the things that I think can be misleading is illustrations in general can be a crapshoot. I guarantee you that 30 years, whatever the illustration says, is not going to be exactly what's going to happen. And so just want to acknowledge that. In whole life, we're based on today's current dividend rates / interest rates, which historically are low if you look out, over the 80s, 90s, an illustration, in the 80s and 90s were like 12, 13% IRRs. And now we're looking at IRRs around 4 or 5%. My question to you is, how comfortable or uncomfortable are you to saying that a whole life insurance policy that's like one that I shared with you, in looking out over the next 30 years, knowing that we're looking at today's assumptions, that we can only go down so much. How comfortable are you assuming that the internal rate of return could be 4%? Because the illustrations that I showed you are high fours, low fives over 30 years, meaning that's every single year. But I just wanted to get your take on like, because I need to use some type of number to start, and I want to use a number that you feel comfortable with.
Well, here's my point. And I think I might have written to you about this, which is you can't spend an IRR. You can't spend a rate of return. You can only spend money. And what I found is that the IRR, high IRRs on certain aspects, when compared to other ones, really don't measure apples to apples or oranges to oranges.
Well, so, I'm actually going to make your point for you. Let's say an IRR is 4.5% and the loan rate's 7%. That right there tells you everything you need to know, that is not sustainable if you take max loans at 7% cost and are only earning 4.5%.
Right.
So I just need to know what type of IRR we can assume right now, because it's going to be important for my first trial appearance in front of the litigator.
I don't think it's an IRR thing. I think all policies work in pretty much the same way. They have different features and they wind up at different ends. But once you're in a set policy, I think we can reasonably accept the safety and security of the projections on a whole life policy, okay, whether the dividends are up or down by a half a point or a third of a point or quarter or stuff like that. I don't think is really a major concern.
Okay.
And so I'm accepting the issues. I'm accepting the policy for what it is.
Okay.
And so the issue to me is not IRR. What the issue to me is the rate of loans that you can take against cash value. And so if you're taking 95% or 85% to get the money out and to use it, that's where the analysis should begin. The last thing I can calculate at the end of the day what an IRR is.
Right.
But that's really less concerned than how much money you're taking out and how much debt is accumulating and how much interest is accumulating.
Yeah.
So my focus is not on the IRR. My focus is really on the withdrawal.
I think where I'm coming from is I'm not even going to make the argument for life insurance around taking 95% out in loans, because I agree with you. So I think the question is, if we're not going to do that, is there a play for life insurance? And I want to just see if you approve of how we position life insurance, because we are not selling life insurance, period, to strip it all out because of the same points that you made. I would feel very uncomfortable if many of our clients' whole strategy was to borrow every single dollar that they possibly could and flirt with the line of staying in force or not. I would feel uncomfortable with that. Now, Nelson himself said you should always pay back the interest, and so even in his book, he's mentioning that. Now, does everyone do that? No, but he's acknowledging even that factor around, like, you have to pay back the interest, and majority of people that practice infinite banking the right way are telling their clients to pay back the loan in full. Now, again, does everyone do that? The policies that you saw were not done that way. People that are selling life insurance as income, not the play. But I'm essentially going to sell life insurance, or the concept of life insurance, without the income component, and I want to see if it holds water.
Okay, well, but the point, if you should always pay the interest, if that's part of the advice, okay, where's the money coming from to pay the interest?
I'm gonna get.
What's the source of the source of repayment? I was in banking. I was a bank auditor for a number of years, and the question is source of repayment.
I'm gonna get there.
I think you're going to be able to generate $100,000 in interest in the 24th year?
I'm gonna get there. I promise. I'm gonna do my drawings and all. Like, you are literally gonna see firsthand my thought process, and you can pick it apart. So, okay. Most people have no idea where to start or how to really evaluate whole life insurance. That's why we've built the Vault. It's all of our best life insurance resources and educational tools all in one place, all for free. We have calculators, handbooks, crash course, deep dive videos on numbers. If you want to learn more, click the link in the description or tag comment below to unlock the Vault. All right, back to the video. We're going to assume, if you're good with this, and trust me, I understand where you're coming from the IRR standpoint. You can't spend an IRR, but we're just going to assume 4.5%, knowing that this is less than over 30 years what I showed you in both illustrations. 4.5 could be high. I would be willing to go down to 4, but just for today, are you good with 4.5?
Okay.
Okay.
I'm willing to go with whatever you're saying. I mean,
Okay.
the truth
Okay.
is that this is an illustration and a hypothetical. If
Yes.
we want to revise it, we'll make it 3%. But let's start at the
Okay.
base.
Well, and we could do a version of 3%. Okay. Now, and this is knowing that we're looking at life insurance from an example of not everyone should have it. You and I both agree with that. Majority of people should protect their human life value with term insurance and invest the difference. We'll said it here first. Like, I agree with that. But I do believe for the top 5, maybe 10% of the population, this could be a play. When we're factoring in a tax rate, this is important because I'm going to give you an equivalent value, which does not show up in a loan analysis. I'll share with you why, but I want to know, like, what tax rate would you like me to assume? Again, you got to trust me on playing this out. You can poke holes at the end, but just I'm laying this out like if I was laying out in a courtroom.
And that's for a tax equivalency number?
Yeah, for a tax equivalency number. So if your money was in a savings account, every year the growth would be paid at ordinary income, and we would assume their top tax bracket because obviously we're making an equivalent to a savings account right now. And so what tax rate would you like me to assume? We can assume we don't have to include state tax if you don't want, but state tax is a thing.
Well, do you have a suggestion? I mean, the top tax rate on income is 35%, depending on how much. I don't think the clients that, we have to take a look at the nature of the clients you're dealing with. Upper middle class people aren't the same as extremely wealthy people. So
Right.
the tax rates are going to be different. But generally, you take a look at, I don't know, 28%. I don't know. Maybe
Okay,
that's
I'll use 28%.
maybe that's a good number. I don't know. I really
I
don't
think it
know.
depends on if you're talking to someone in California or not, and it depends. But I'll take 28%. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to assume, because when I look at your book, I look at the difference between your term insurance and your whole life example, and the term insurance was 11% of what the whole life premium was. And so I'm going to assume that we're going to include 11% for a term cost, just to factor in if you purchased whole life, you may not need to purchase, term for that difference. And it scales with the premium. And so,
just as a point of clarification, I don't think I use the savings account. I think I use an I bond at 3% tax-free accumulation in terms of my numbers. I'm probably one of the few people you'll talk to that believes that everybody should max out their I bonds at $10,000 a year as a way of diversifying their portfolios. One of
that
the
might be a separate episode that we have you.
But what I'm saying is that my illustration assume that there's no tax on the savings.
I understand. I understand that. For right now, my first example that I'm going to propose to you is how someone could use this for an infinite banking concept. And so most people are comparing this to a high yield savings account, not an I bond. So I'm going to use that example. Okay. So and we can run this at a lower IRR number, but let's say over time, a life insurance policy, if it had an internal rate of return, let's say over 30 years of 4.5%, if we're assuming a tax rate of 20, so these are all assumptions, 28%, and assuming a cost of insurance, essentially savings of what you wouldn't have to pay with this, the taxable equivalent of the life insurance, and again, just very clear, this is not what you can spend at this point, but just the taxable equivalent is 7%. And that's off of, you're only earning 4.5, just to be really clear for the listeners. There's no phantom math going on. But when you factor in taxes and when you factor in cost of insurance, we're taking something that is 4.5% growth, and the taxable insurance equivalent is 7%. Do you have any questions or pushbacks at this point?
Well, I understand it comes out to 7%, but the underlying issue with all of this, I think, that we have to address, which is whatever the policy is and however it performs, getting the money,
I'm
if
gonna
it's at
I'm gonna address that.
7% or 6%, getting the money, you can't get all of that money out. What's
Yeah,
accessible to you is substantially less. In addition to which, for every dollar you borrow, you're going to have to pay back an additional 5 cents or $1.05 or another 5% for every year that you haven't held that you hold it. And so the cost of the borrowing or what you're getting involves a cost that's not affected here.
I promise you, Fred, we're gonna get to this. I'm gonna be more
we
thorough
haven't
than maybe
talked
some of my
about it,
videos.
so
I promise. So what I'm gonna do just on top of this is, I know I already 4.5% is lower than the IRRs that I showed you in an illustration, but I'm only gonna take 90% of this number, assuming that we're just gonna know in our head whatever the cash value is. We're only gonna take 90% of that number, which would make this IRR only 4.05, which draws this taxable equivalent
pre-tax.
The IRR is growing tax deferred.
Right, but if you wanted to take the money out and let's surrender it as opposed to borrow it at 4% or 5%, you have to pay the tax. And so the after-tax IRR on surrender is going to be lower, right?
Yeah, well, it's first in, first out. So anything on basis you get out first, and then in addition to that, you would have to pay tax if you withdrew interest. You'd have to pay ordinary income tax, which would wipe out this whole tax benefit.
Right. So what I'm saying is that as long as it's in the policy, it looks great.
Okay. Yeah,
depending on how you get it out, which is that at 4 or 5 or 6% a year, or pay the taxes on if there are any gains, if you want to take the money out. At the end, you can certainly pay the taxes. But in both cases, the cash in, cash out after taxes is a lower IRR, of course.
Yes. So I'm just showing, even if we assume only 90% access to the cash value, the equivalent value by just looking at the tax and cost of insurance is 6.3%. Now I'm going to go to my whiteboard here. We're going to draw two drawings, Fred. We're going to have person A and person B. And we're looking at, and I'm going to play two different scenarios. I'm going to play what I call the entrepreneurial investor, and then I'm going to talk about the retirement optimizer. These are two separate people. The entrepreneur or the investor is putting money. They're making money. Person A is putting it into a high yield savings account. What type of rate of return over the next 30 years do you think we could get in a high yield savings account?
Do I have to include the taxes?
No, don't include the taxes. Okay. Just gross.
If you're in a high yield tax willing to accept the risk, probably 3.5%, maybe a little bit more, 4.
3.5%. And then, so you're putting your money here, and obviously you have to pay taxes. Okay, that's fine, but it still is solid. And then you take out this money, and you don't have to pay anything. Just for the record, you don't have no loans, no cost, and you take this money out, and you can buy real estate, you can buy businesses, you can buy stocks. Are you a crypto fan or not crypto fan?
No.
Okay, no crypto. You could buy whatever you want. So you agree that this is how most people do this. You put money in, you're having it earn some money, and then you withdraw that money, and you buy things like houses, businesses, stocks. And then the idea would be, ideally, if you're successful, is these activities would create more money, and then you can create the cycle again. You're able to save more over time and make bigger purchases and investments.
Well, I'm not sure that I'm 100% on board with this, because in my experience, people don't buy insurance out of savings. They buy it out of income. If they're not
Right.
earning
So
income, they're not buying insurance. And if they're paying insurance out of savings, it's because their income is falling.
no, you
So,
can see this as this dollar represents income.
okay, well, you're calling it save. So the last thing they do, you may warehouse money for a week or a month in a savings account, but you're not going to put money in a savings account to, to buy stocks, or you're going to put it into the stock market. So the idea of paying taxes and waiting for the appreciation in a savings account probably is less likely than putting the money directly into the asset that's growing.
That's fair. I'm just saying, I'm just giving the benefit of the doubt of this. We could easily say this is a checking account that you're putting your money in fast and then it's just in
Okay.
most cases when I'm just to break this down, when someone makes money, usually there's two buckets. Usually they're spending money and then they're saving and investing. So when I say savings, I'm literally thinking of your portion of your income that you're saving and investing. So I should have clarified that, but this is your savings portion of your income that you're putting for either a day or 6 months or a year. The reason I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt is there are many clients and entrepreneurs out there, like Warren Buffett's sitting on billions and billions of dollars in cash right now. He's not sitting because he just thinks it's a great investment. He's literally sitting, waiting for great opportunities. And so there are business owners and people that we know that have hundreds of thousands. Sometimes they're sitting on millions of dollars, not because they just like the rate of return over 30 years, but they're sitting, waiting for an opportunity. So if they were
But of
sitting
course,
on
Warren
millions of
Buffett
dollars,
isn't calling you for insurance. You're dealing with clients that don't have the magnitude of that kind of wealth.
say that again.
Well, you're dealing with clients that don't have the magnitude of the wealth of Warren Buffett or anything else like that. You're talking about basically income earners who've allocated their excess income into a variety of other investments, right? I mean, it's all after tax. They pay their taxes. They
Correct.
take the after tax money and they put it into stocks or bonds or real estate or whatever they are. They're not, for the most part, I don't know many people who have a savings account large enough to be concerned about making investments unless they're warehousing money for a specific opportunity.
Yeah, I would say that there's a whole group of people that are making money to invest in other things. I would put myself in this category of I run a business, I have money, liquid, I'm looking for business opportunities. And so not all my money is tied up in investments right now. I'm having my money sitting somewhere so that I can either buy more businesses, hire more people, do marketing campaigns, invest in a property. So we're talking about a specific person who values control of their money. Okay, so this is scenario one. B is incorporating insurance as a portion of where they can save their money. Just to be clear, I'm not saying that all their money should warehouse in insurance. I'm just letting you know that there could be a world where they put money into maybe one of the whole life policies that I showed you, and we just showed that these things are only earning, let's just say 4.05%. So, and
It's
okay,
not
so
earnings, it's just growth.
just growth. It happens to. There's other benefits to it. I think you could agree that there's a death benefit. That's okay. That's great. And there's, if they keep the policy in force, there's they don't have to pay tax on the growth. And there's, depending on the state, there can be creditor protection. So there's other benefits that they get in there. And then I'm going to make your point really clear in a second. I think you're going to be impressed with this point. They can do the same things. Can do the homes, businesses, and stocks. Okay. Now, let's say instead of getting this money free, it costs them 6%. Okay. So if I had an account that I said, hey, put your money in, it's going to be a negative 2% each year, how many people do you think would come to me? I would say almost
What I've
nobody.
seen, lots.
Yeah, but
I mean,
like
intellectually, I understand what you're saying. It's like
yeah. It
you
would
don't want
be
to invest in a sinking ship. I mean, that is you're
correct.
eroding your
Yeah,
returns every
it's
year.
dumb.
Negative.
It's dumb. So it would be dumb for person B to put money into an account only earning 4% and and then and then accessing their money. Technically, it's not their money; it's the insurance company's money. It costs them 6. If you only look at the rate of return, like this is the same thing that you've been pointing out. If someone's just stripping a policy for cash value, it's this same thing is just not sustainable. But even if it's not going to blow up, Fred, I don't want to be dumb. Why would I even if my policy wasn't going to blow up, why would I be happy with 4 and paying 6? Like mathematically that's really dumb. Wouldn't you agree with what I said is not intelligent if that those were the two things that you were given?
Okay, well, you've done really two things. Number one is you've created a kind of a way station in the form of an insurance policy that I don't think is necessary in the upper one.
Yeah, no,
But yes,
not. There's no
you wouldn't
cost in the
want to
upper one.
think you're accumulating at 4%, and the cost of doing that is 6% on those loans or those money.
Well, yeah. The cost of it's technically quote unquote using your money through a policy loan is 6%, and you're only earning 4%. I'm gonna make a point. You may not like it, but I'm gonna make a point to why I still am a proponent of life insurance, even with this fact. And the point is this: is when you factor in the benefits, like again, I'm making an assumption that the policy stays in force. Tax deferred growth. When you talk about this loan is not taxable, so that's benefit. It would be a bummer if you had to pay taxes on that. When you understand that there is a death benefit, when you understand that there's critical and chronic illness riders, when you understand that there could be some significant creditor protection depending on what state you're in, when you see that when it comes especially to whole life, I won't speak for IUL, that there's not tons of volatility that you necessarily have to be worried about, like from the insurance company not paying or making good on their promises. What
I
I would
agree.
say, go on.
I agree. There's very little volatility. It's fairly predictable.
What I would say, and this is again, if this is a stretch we're making, and if you don't agree with the stretch, you should never do permanent life insurance. But if you agree with this stretch, I think you understand. Just what I showed you, I just showed you a tax example and an insurance example. And we saw that the IRR went from, the equivalent value was over 6%. When you factor in some of these other things, chronic illness rider, I wouldn't call it long-term care, but it acts similar to that and a growing death benefit and all. I believe while there's not cash-on-cash arbitrage, there's what's called value arbitrage, meaning I do believe an insurance policy gives this person more benefits than just the IRR. I think an IRR is a portion, but there's more to life insurance than just the IRR. So I believe there's this thing called value arbitrage, and not to say that there's cash on cash arbitrage, but when you factor in all the other benefits of insurance, which I think this is like the essence of good insurance planning, is does the insurance product add more value to your portfolio than not? If it doesn't, you should never do it. I believe for a lot of our clients, when integrated into what they're currently doing, I believe that their policies are getting anywhere from, we'll just say 6 to 10% of value, not IRR. So this, again, will still blow up if you loan out 95%. I'm acknowledging that. What I'm saying is there's other benefits to life insurance that you don't necessarily need to die to have access to. And when you're only comparing a life insurance policy's forensics to if it blows up, you're just literally comparing it. You're just comparing the cash and loan, which is fine. I'm just thinking the more you understand about the benefits that life insurance gives you, which most of the time when people sell them are not actually educating on the actual benefits. They're just trying to
Well,
maybe pitch a growth. I do believe that there's value, and if there's value greater than the cost of borrowing, why wouldn't you put money into this if you value if I really believe and can prove that life insurance is giving me a 9% value to my portfolio and I get access to that money at 6%. Well, now you can understand why myself and maybe other people say, yeah, I will put money into it because of all those factors. But if I just compare it to the cash on growth and the borrowing, if you just give me those two facts, you're dumb if you're intellectually dumb if you believe this talking point. And so many insurance people believe this talking point, and this is why I'm trying to call them out just as much as I'm, on here trying to prove why insurance can play a role.
Well, let me just say this. Number one, we're assuming you're borrowing at the max. Let's assume you only need to borrow 10%, then paying the freight isn't going to really much damage your. But with IBC, when I read it and when I listen to people and stuff like that, if you're not borrowing out all the money, you are essentially buying too much insurance. Now, most people don't need, if you have $3 million death benefit, if that's what you need, accessing this strategy by buying another $8 million or increasing your death benefit is only done to support the policy. It's not done for the death benefit. And so the problem that I see with this example is you're likely to overinsure yourself. Now, apparently that's the objective, is to buy more insurance than you need because it allows you to have the flexibility of borrowing more money long term. I think
Yeah,
that's
but
going
I
to
would
be
say when you
careful.
say overinsure yourself, like if I told you how much life insurance I have, I think you would probably say I'm overinsured. Is that why?
But
Why
let's
is
talk
that
about it from
bad?
a litigation standpoint. You're in front of court. The insurance companies have a set of guidelines as to parameters as to what the right amount of insurance would be, a multiple of income and stuff like that. When you get into a litigation standpoint and you see that multiple and you can see what the insurance company sees to it, what we found out is that the normally accepted insurance level needed for somebody like that is 3 or 4 times the amount of insurance that they actually need. And so when in front of a jury, that's an excess cost
I
that they
see.
don't need to
Yeah.
have.
And I'm even I'll be very clear. I would not say like in Nelson, I think this is where he writes and I disagree. He alludes in his book that your income should equal premium. And not only
Yes.
do I think that's damaging, but that's not even possible. And if it is, that means you're getting way too much insurance. And it hence goes back to the problem is if you do that, this my lovely bad drawing shows the problem. If all your income's going in at and earning 4, but it costs you 6, how are you going to pay for it long term? It's not sustainable to it's going to topple over, and a
Right.
good thing turns into a bad thing because you have too much of it. I think that's what you're saying, and I agree with you if that's what you're
Yeah.
saying.
So I'm just, just imagine yourself in court having to deal with that particular issue when a client has collapsed or his policies have collapsed around him, and you're going and a lawyer is suing. And he's saying, well, first of all, even the insurance company says he didn't need more than two or three. The appropriate amount was $2 million, and here he's got $10 million. He's paying for too
Yep.
much. It just doesn't sell well to the to insurer.
I'm with you, and I'm just letting you know, like we have clients that take a portion of their income, they put it into life insurance, and then they deploy it in other investments. And they value, and when integrated into their plan, they believe that life insurance is getting them far greater than the IRR. And in this case, they're not using this policy and they're not going to strip it all out. They're using it as a place to have access to capital and then deploy it. And then just to answer your question, let's say they're only earning 4% and it costs them 6%. Well, the activities that they invest in, whether it's in real estate, whether it's in business, whether it's other investments, they should not take a loan at 6% if they can at least generate that. And again, I'm not a proponent of using loans to buy things like cars or going on vacation or groceries and all. I'm saying if you're going to buy an asset and it costs you 6%, you should earn a lot more than 6% in this example. And if that's the case, if you can't, then you shouldn't take a loan. And
Well, no,
so
I
I'm
agree.
just in summary, like person number one, we meet with a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people that want control. They're either thinking about putting their money into a savings or a checking account and then deploying that into other deals, or they're looking at potentially using life insurance. And while in the short term, the disadvantage of life insurance is they have less money than what they've put in. Obviously, it takes a couple of years to have more money than what you put in. There's health qualifications that need to happen. Over time, they value the insurance death benefit. They value the creditor protection. They value the chronic illness right. They value all the other benefits. And they believe that their insurance policy is getting them far greater, we'll just say 8% as a value, not as a rate of return. And they're happy paying 6% to access the insurance company's money and using their money as collateral. But then when they use their money at 6%, they need to make sure that they're earning greater than 6% on those activities. And how does that money get paid back? Those activities, whether they appreciate and sell or whether they cash flow, needs to pay back the loan before they realize that money in income.
And that would be if there's, let me just say, and if in fact there was sufficient growth in that, there would be a tax consequence of liquidating one asset and paying off the loan, right?
Yeah, if you sell a real estate property or sell a business or invest in a stock that appreciates, there's going to be taxes.
Right. So you'd be paying it off with after-tax dollars for the most, if there were taxable dollars, I mean.
Correct. Yeah, okay. Correct. And the policy's not going to, unless the it's like all 95% loaned out and you're not paying interest, the policy would easily be able to self-sustain itself. But yeah, if you leverage all of it, yeah, you're very on the risk of if one of these real estate properties go down or business goes down or investments go down, you could lose your policy. And if there's taxable gain in there, have to pay. Now, I just also want to remind you, the same thing's in a savings account, but we don't ever worry about that because there's not really tax buildup in the savings account. There's not really an issue. And so, but if you put your money into a savings account and then invest in a real estate property that went down or a business or investments that went down, you're losing your money either way. This insurance just might have an extra tax consequence if there's interest above gain basis.
Well, what you're doing is parking money in a savings account. It's not, I don't think that the savings account that you're describing is the vehicle for purchasing.
No, the investment in the savings account, the investment is in the real estate business or the investment that you put your money in.
You don't need the
savings
savings
account is just the place that is you're putting your money to then deploy, whether it's a day or 5 years.
Okay.
So what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on people using life insurance in this scenario, the way that I laid it out? What are the pros and cons the way that you see it?
Well, I think within the parameters of the insurance that someone needs, the real insurance for protection, if you can buy the right amount of insurance that you want and then borrow out, that's fine. The problem that I have is increasing insurance coverage. And then, as you know, now, just to kind of back up for a second, let's clarify my thinking. In these cases where you're using insurance to purchase other investments as a vehicle for higher returning investments.
Yep.
So you're paying, you're paying 4 or 5 and you want to get 8 or 9 or 10. Okay. And so, that's the ultimate strategy, which is to leverage it. The problem comes back really when you have to, you're going to be paying. It seems, I think this, I don't know if this is 3.0, but the idea is you pay the interest out of pocket and you accumulate the loan debt to be paid off by the death benefit. Now, is that correct?
I personally would pay off the loan with the investment activity. I would not wait for the death benefit to pay off the loan, but that could be an option that the death benefit pays off. It's like the buy, borrow, die strategy.
So the risk is your investments don't pay off.
I agree. No,
right?
yeah, I agree.
So
Yeah.
you started out trying to avoid market risk by being in one of these guaranteed things. And then what you've done is you've borrowed out, and the repayment of all of this is dependent on some kind of market investment or real estate or whatever it is. So
Yeah.
it sounds like you're um, going a little bit backwards in terms of the risk
Well,
elements, in terms
well,
of,
no, because here, this is what I would say is if someone you're gonna like this. If someone puts all their money into a whole life policy, like all their savings into a whole life, and they earn 4.5%, let's just say, okay, or someone puts their money into the S&P, they're going to earn historically a lot more than 4%. Wouldn't you agree with that? You good with like
well, there's
8%?
risk involved in the S&P. The
Right.
S and it all depends on what you're talking about. And I think I
So what I'm
even
saying
wrote you
is,
on this.
I'm saying I think it would be a very poor strategy to put all your money into insurance as an investment. I don't look at insurance as an investment. So when you say someone like is putting their money in something safe and guaranteed and then they're putting it at risk, that's valid, but if they I would never recommend them put all their money in life insurance because yeah, is there risk in some other things? Yes, but the opportunity cost of their money growing, like just keeping their money in insurance and not doing anything with it, could also cost them a lot.
Well,
So,
this I'm a former banker, and the source of repayment is really the one of the large issues in terms of evaluating risk. And what you're suggesting is that the underlying assets, which you believe at the outset are going to return 8, 9, or 10%, are going to be capable of generating either the cash flow or sufficient growth after taxes to repay the underlying loans. And I say that's a very, depending on how the loan accumulates debt, that's a kind of very dicey question, which puts the responsibility on the policyholder to know what he's investing in, right? I mean, it requires to get an 8 or 9% return that cash flows that can accomplish that result after taxes is not an easy. It's easy to say if I get 8% in the S&P and only getting
I agree.
6%.
Yeah, I
So
agree.
the point is that adds a huge amount of complexity to the management of your borrowing strategy.
Yeah, but I
And
think the assumption I'm making early on is this person is going to take those risks regardless. So they're going to start a business. Most businesses fail. They're going to invest in real estate. They're going to do their thing. And so the question is, yes, is adding a life insurance policy good or bad in that equation? You could make the argument that it's better than if they add an insurance policy than if they just put all their money directly through a savings account into that same thing. Because the insurance policy might give them like extra benefits and guardrails, or it could be the exact opposite. It could be worse because they end up losing the insurance policy in the process. But compared to what? In both scenarios, if they make a bad investment, they're going to lose their money. In scenario A, they're going to lose their money. In scenario B, they're going to lose their money.
well, the issue is risk. You see, insurance is sold as a low risk, no risk strategy. Basically, it's a
Whole
guaranteed
life,
return,
especially. Yeah.
a whole life, especially. So when you buy a whole life and then you put it at risk to the market, as you're doing, that is, if something collapses and you lose in your investments, let's just say that, and you borrowed the money, and you then don't have the source of repayment for any of the particular loans, you're going to lapse. And when a policy lapses because you don't have the money, you get an even bigger tax bill on the loans.
Right.
So, right. So the point is, you're now adding back the risk that you're seeking to avoid by putting it
Yeah.
through the insurance policy.
I I don't disagree. I think those risks are the same regardless in A and B. And if we want to play the tax thing, if you put all your money in an investment and you lose it, there potentially is a tax benefit that you'd get, by that, but I don't disagree. For the
Well, you do
record,
get a deduction on losing investments. When you lose in insurance, you don't get a deduction.
right, but I'm saying that could potentially offset. But what I'm also saying is I'm not a proponent of people leveraging all their money in insurance. I'm not at all. So I'm in agreement with you. I also think it could be very problematic to take your very safe asset and put it at risk. I'm just saying that if someone is going to deploy $100,000 into an investment, there's risks that they're taking. And whether they do it through a life insurance policy or their savings account, the chances of they have a chance of losing all that 100,000. And in scenario A, they carry that risk. There's not an insurance policy attached to that. Whereas in scenario B, there's an insurance policy attached to that, which potentially creates a little bit more complexity. But at the end of the day, losing money is losing money, and it should be avoided at all costs. And yeah,
But there's a difference in losing borrowed money and losing your own money. Because when you lose borrowed money, you still have to repay it. And if you lose your own money, you get a tax write-off. And so,
well, when you lose, so
you have two risks within. If you go through insurance, you can lose if you lose in the investments, you got a huge problem in your insurance. That's a doubling of the risk, in my opinion, as opposed to a reduction of the risk.
I hear what you're saying.
Well, look. If you put your cash value on your financial statement, right, and you go sour, and the bank says, "Okay, you owe us a bunch of money, whoever you owe your money in," and they've got collateral on your insurance policy, you could be in a lapse or in a surrender policy simply because you've used it as collateral for ordinary loans. So I wouldn't necessarily get involved in risk investments with insurance as collateral. First of all, there's a tax consequence too, which we haven't really discussed. But if you invest in other assets and those assets wind up paying the interest, you invest in a real estate, and so the real estate pays the interest on that. That's taxable income to the policyholder. And so,
what do you mean that's taxable income?
It's tax.
That's a loan
if anything, I'm just talking about the interest now. If in fact you invest in, let's say, real estate, and then the real estate company writes a check for your interest to pay off the interest like they're supposed to be doing, that's income generating to the policyholder. He has to either get the income directly, and then he gets a 1095, a 1099, and then he can deduct it. But if any other entity is paying the interest, it's taxable income to the policyholder. And that's not really discussed very often, but that's a high.
I just want to better understand what you're saying. So if person A gets paid, they're gonna have to okay, so
let's say you have an S corp or an LLC or something.
Okay, you have an LLC
that owns that, and at the end of the day, the LLC has a profit in it.
Yes,
and the LLC can distribute that. It's going to be the profits are going to be taxable anyway. But if the LLC, or you ought to say a corporation, S corporation, if the place that you've invested actually pays the interest, that interest is imputed to the policyholder as income. So he takes it as income and he doesn't get a deduction. So businesses really can't deduct the interest on if they pay off the policy loan. That's a real tax complication.
I get what you're saying. So I think there's an internal benefit and an external benefit, and we're talking about the external benefit. The taxes are going to be the same regardless if you use life insurance or not. Is that what you're saying? Because it's like You're saying there's
No,
more
no, no. What
tax if you
happens
use a life
is that if
insurance.
you pay the interest, you don't get a deduction, right? And it's after
Yeah,
tax dollars. If the investment that you make pays the interest directly, as opposed to you
yeah,
and then
and they
you
get a
paying it, stuff
deduction
like
for
that,
that.
you have that is imputed interest to you, and it's the same thing. They have to give you a 1099 for that.
Okay, I'm gonna look into this. I
Yeah.
don't fully get what you're saying because it's like if you're telling me if a if I pay back the loan that the I would have to
Personally.
then I would incur an extra tax consequence on that loan
No,
repayment.
there's different tax treatment. So if you get the money and then you pay the interest, it's just on a policy loan. It's not deductible, right?
Hmm.
Right, because you don't get
Yep.
deductions on paying interest on loans
Unless it's for
collateralized by
business
insurance.
purposes. Unless it's for business purposes.
If you have a business and
Yes.
you choose to take a deduction for that,
And when we say deduction, you choose you to write off the interest
write off the interest, right? That's the
for business
tax deduction, right?
purposes. Yes.
Okay, and you have a deduction, right?
Yes.
Okay, now who pays the interest on the loan?
The policyholder
So how does the policyholder get the money?
through
He gets it from the LLC, right?
correct, which there's going to be
Right.
taxes on
And
that.
when he gets and since it's profit, when he gets that from the LLC, he's going to get a 1099 for the income.
100%.
And then he has to deduct it. And then he can't deduct it when he contributes it to pay off the interest portion of the loan. That is, it's not deductible. The company can deduct it, but he's going to get a
Yeah.
1099 as an income, and then he can't deduct it. So what I'm saying is, I hear a lot about people saying, if I make a business thing, I get the tax deduction. Well, you may get the tax deduction, but if you get the tax deduction, you're going to get a taxable income to the policyholder,
Yeah.
unless the policyholder pays it out of pocket, and then
I'm
it's
just
after tax
I
dollars.
just it's really important that I understand what you're saying here. Okay. So person A, let's just make math really simple, has $100,000 in a savings account, puts money into an investment, and let's say get has $100,000 profit that sells at the end of the year. $100,000 profit.
Right.
Okay.
Well, that's
They're going to
tax.
have to pay tax. This is just a savings account, not insurance. They're going to have to pay tax on this 100,000.
Yeah.
Let's assume it's ordinary income, correct?
Yes.
Okay, 30. So are you cool with the 30% tax? So they're going to
Okay.
pay $30,000 worth of tax.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Person B, the difference is their money's in life insurance. And let's say they have a $100,000 loan. Okay. Just so they're taking a loan, and let's say it's 6%. 6% loan. They have the same thing, $100,000 worth of profit. Now, there's a subtract 6,000 from this because of the interest.
Right.
So now you're at 94,000. Now,
Who's paying the interest?
this person is the investor on both sides. So this
Okay, so
person,
then the entity is not paying the interest.
this person owns the entity, so the entity's paying the interest. So the entity gets this it gets a deduction, we'll just say,
Right.
but they're also it's subtracting a 6,000. So
Okay, so I understand that part. The
okay,
90,000, they want to take the deduction. Now, how do they pay? How is the loan paid off? Well, the
they pay
loan
the
has to
loan
be
from the
if you take
profits.
a deduction, and you pay the loan, obviously.
Yep.
If in fact the entity pays the interest, well, what the entity has to do is pay the $6,000 to the
To the insurance company.
If he pays it directly to the insurance company, that $6,000 is income to the policyholder.
I don't think that's correct.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, well, we'll fact check it.
Right. Now, if they're not, if the entity isn't paying the interest and the policyholder simply pays it, then there's no income imputation because he's just using his own money.
So let's say
Right?
the
There's no tax
policyholder,
deduction for it.
let's say the policyholder repays back the interest, but the policyholder says that this interest, can he take a deduction on his taxes?
Well, if the entity isn't paying the interest, there's no deduction, right?
Okay, so we'll say that there's no deduction, but I will double check the whole deduction thing because you're the first person that's ever told me this, that there's imputed interest to.
In one of my emails to you, I sent a better explanation of this that we
Okay,
can do on the
I'll take a better look at that. Now, 30% tax on the 94,000 is 28, so they would be paying 28,200 in tax. But obviously, they're gonna have less money because of the $6,000 of interest versus they have $70,000 left over.
Right. If they take the deduction, that makes sense. Sure.
Okay, we'll definitely look at that. I'm gonna land the plane here fast, so I think yeah, we're going back and forth. A lot of our clients are people that stuff money into life insurance policies, use that to fund other things. I hear what you're saying about taking a safe asset, making it unsafe, and there's risks there. Totally get that. But that's a way that a lot of people want to use their life insurance policies, is they want to use it to build up cash value to then utilize. And I understand that there's risk tied to that.
Mm-hmm.
The other way is simply, let's just take out the entrepreneur and let's just say they're just using life insurance. They're using whole life as a portion of their investment portfolio. And so if they have a investment portfolio, they're using a portion of that as a bond, maybe a bond alternative. And instead of withdrawing all that money, they're using this as when the market and equities are down, they're gonna tap into a non-correlated asset and let the stocks recover.
I would agree with that. That certainly makes sense. The question is proportion. How much are you going to put into that savings or that bond? That is, in terms of dealing it. And what we find is that what turns out to be a small wedge ultimately encompasses 90% of the circle because they keep on putting
I agree. I
up.
think the idea would be having anywhere from 3 to 5 years of income into a non-correlated asset. Everything above 5 years should be invested. I think the academic studies are pretty clear that, if you have 5 years, you can withdraw a lot higher with like less risk of running out of money because you have that volatility. But if you had, let's say, 20 years of income in a life insurance policy, there's opportunity costs of that money growing better in the markets or other things. So I think the 3 to 5 years of income in a non-correlated asset gives you the best outcome to from a diversification standpoint. So
if you can keep that wedge at, it looks like about 30% or 20% of the policy, that's one thing. Once that wedge in terms of it grows beyond that amount of money, that's you're over-insuring yourself. You're paying for more
and
than
you're
you
saying
need.
You're saying if someone had a half their portfolios in insurance, in your opinion, that would be over-insuring, and they're actually going to get a worse outcome than if they had.
They should only have in the savings what they anticipate needing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's an emergency. So if you have a need for $150,000, don't buy more insurance that's going to give you $600,000 of cash value if you keep on funding it.
Yeah.
And Fred, that's the proportionality of taking things out.
I want to thank you. I think there's definitely research for me to do after this, and
this has been terrific. We ought to continue on, maybe on or off the air. It doesn't much matter to me.
I think it's important. This is a takeaway I'll have for people. I think it's important to talk to people, and I think it's tremendous that you're willing to come on this show. I'm excited to welcome you back on. And I think it's important. We needed to be doing more discussions like this instead of, just, yelling at each other through non-conversations.
No,
And
I think we could write a book together. I think we could co-author a
yeah,
book,
that would,
a he said, she said kind of thing, and stuff like
yeah,
that, and make it really entertaining and
yeah,
worthwhile. I mean, that's the way I feel, because I
yeah,
think we both have interesting points that people use, and my problem
yeah.
generally focuses on the repayment of the debt and the magnitude of the purchases. Do you use infinite banking?
I do. I don't. I'm careful with that language because all infinite banking is just a way of explaining what I just showed you. What I showed you up top about saving money and using that as an emergency and opportunity fund is what I do with a lot of my money. Is I have cash values. I have most of them. I'm just ready to look at different opportunities, but I also have money in the market. I have money invested in other things. So it's not all in one asset, but I personally do what I drew out earlier. But we have lots of people that use life insurance just as a bond alternative, and they're doing the typical investment way, but they believe a portion of their portfolio should be in whole life to give them a diversification, but it's diversification with maybe a little bit more benefits than bonds because of the death benefit, creditor protection, chronic illness riders, and all.
Well, if the cash flow works, then you might do it. And so I look at the cash flow. So you're in or
Yeah,
out of pocket for all of them.
yeah,
Most of these policies, regardless of what you take out, you're out of pocket for 10 or 15 years. Is that when it nets out to how much you've paid in and interest and everything else, and how much it's worth, you've received through loans less than what you've paid generally. That is, breaking even on a cash flow basis that's getting all of your money back plus some. Is a lot tougher over long term than breaking even with the policy in 5 or 10 years.
yeah. So Fred,
We need to continue this. At least I'm
yes,
willing to do it, and
yes,
I'd like to kind of work on some formulas and stuff with you guys to figure out what's most appropriate and where the
cool,
risks are.
cool.
So,
I'm just grateful that we can have these conversations, and I think we're going to inspire more people to talk, and I think the industry is going to be better for it. So Fred, thank you so much. I know you
well,
gotta.
thank you so much
Yeah,
for having me.
yeah,
This has
it
been
was an
really
absolute
fun.
pleasure, and I hope we have a 50-year difference in age, and I think it's an absolute
Well, you need
inspiration
a
that you've been with.
plastic brain. You need a
Well,
brain with plasticity.
yeah, that's right.
Hopefully, you
All
got
right,
one. All right, kiddo. Take
take
care.
care.
Bye bye.